And it's also a concept that confuses a lot of people. Good. Okay, so, and I want to talk about this idea of binding one's tefillot to the tzaddik. Now, this is something that I don't know if you have familiarity with it or not. There's a kind of nusach that's used before prayer, before doing other mitzvah activities also, about binding one's tefillahs to the tzaddik. Now, there's a lot of this concept and the practice has a lot of room for misinterpretation and misunderstanding inherent within it, because obviously you're not praying to any tzaddik, you're praying to Hashem. You can only pray to God. That's one of Rambam's 13 principles of Jewish faith, is that one can only pray to God. And so the whole idea, which is more articulated in Chassidut than in other places, of binding one's tefillahs up with someone greater than yourself. So that's something that is sort of taken as a given in Chassidus. In some places it's a little more clarified than others. But fortunately, we have a few lessons from Rabbi Nachman that help to make the whole idea much more clear. And I actually, just in my own life, before I got married, before I really had much to do with Breslov, I had a few introductions to Breslov. So the main one was through exposure to the Nigunim, which was Minchah, that I got exposed to the Breslov Nigunim while I was still in school. And I felt very much like, oh, this is something that I connect very deeply with. It was intuitive, and I knew that I was going to be, throughout my life, I was going to have something to do with these nigunim because they spoke to me so deeply. But in terms of teaching, it's very interesting. I had some familiarity with Rabbi Nachman's stories. I came across them. I had a copy of the stories that were given to me when I was a teenager. And I read The Lost Princess. I tried to read some of the other ones. I had a hard time with it. It was the old English edition that had been done with these kind of interesting black and white illustrations by Elia Sukkot, and the translation had been done by Rav Gedalia Koenig's Rebbitzin Esther Yehudis, who was an English speaker. And so the translation was a little bit, it wasn't the smoothest, although it was fairly well done, but it was accurate, and it didn't have any commentary whatsoever. It was before Rabbi Kaplan's edition had been published, or maybe maybe he had already published that, but I might not have had familiarity with it. I'm not sure. It depends. I can't remember exactly what year it was. 1980, 83, maybe 83 or 84. When I saw it for the first time. Anyway, so that was the first. Yeah, the yellow cover. That yellow cover. Elia had done the illustrations. So before I went away to seminary, I was always buying books, and I came across a little book called Likutey Moharan. I came across it in a bookshop, and I had heard about Likutey Moharan because, I had a roommate who was very into Breslov, but I hadn't really learned any of the teachings, and I thought, okay, this may be something I could take a look at. So I bought a Likutey Moharan, which is a digest version that Reb Nosson had been asked to make, to write up by Rabbi Nachman himself, to sort of get, kind of cut to the chase and strip out a lot of the proof texts and just get to the practical application of each of the lessons. So that's the kitzur, and it's not like it's such a kitzur sometimes, but it's not always that much more compressed than the lesson. It depends on the lesson. Anyway, in any case, I brought it with me when I went to Cleveland, and I learned the first lesson, and it me intrigued. It spoke to me. That first lesson is about seeing the seichel that's in everything and using it to come close to Hashem. So I was I could grasp that. And I liked it. And then I opened the second lesson. And the second lesson is about the nature of prayer. And also very quickly into the lesson, Reb Nosson says, and you have to bind up your prayers to the tzaddik of the generation. And I penciled in anytime I come across a word that was unfamiliar in any learning that I did, I always had a pencil and I would mark it in a book after looking it up, because that's how you learn. And I remember I put a little question mark in the margin there, and I said, I have never heard this idea before, and that was it. I closed the book. I said, this idea, these concepts are, these must be Hasidic concepts that you have to have some kind of preparation for, because I've never heard anything like this. This is new to me, and because I didn't have the means to be able to understand it. And I had learned Hasidus, by the way. I mean, I had spent 2 years learning Chabad Hasidus, so it's not like I had not learned any Hasidus, but I had never seen an idea like that before. I really wasn't familiar with it. And I said, I don't want to learn things that I don't understand. That's a little beyond me. So I just closed up the book. I put a little question mark in the margin. I closed it up and put it away. I didn't take out that book again, I think, until after I got engaged, or maybe even after I got married. But and then I was newly introduced to the idea. And the truth is that the kitzur, the way Reb Nosson phrases it, there's not really enough development outside, in the digest version of lesson 2 in the Likutey Moharan. When you're trying to streamline it too much, so you wind up missing a lot of the rationale and the reasoning process and the clarification process that makes the idea even possible for you to grasp. So Reb Nosson wrote his digest version sort of, I guess, mainly for Hasidim who already were familiar with the ideas and just want to be able to review. But as a first introduction to the idea, it wasn't the best thing, because I just didn't know what to make of it. Now, but I do want to talk about the idea, because because this is a Breslov program. We're learning Rabbi Nachman's lessons, and presumably anybody who's with us is interested in learning about what is the Breslover Shita, or what's the Breslov approach to this particular subject, and because it's the kind of thing that is easily misunderstood. So I feel like it's good to dedicate the last lesson to clarifying it. So we happen to be learning this lesson in my Monday night class that's here in Yerushalayim, which goes slowly and carefully through Likutey Moharan, and we move from from teaching to teaching. So we started this lesson maybe a month and after Sukkot, so a month and a little bit ago. So we've already had like 6 lessons. I think we've had 5 lessons on it, and we're well into it, and we probably have another lesson, maybe 2, to finish after Hanukkah. But this is really the lesson where it's most articulated. Now, Rabbi Nachman has many, many lessons about prayer, and also about the role of the tzaddik in terms of prayer, but this is probably the one that is easiest for us to get the total picture. And by the time he gets to the end of the lesson, which I haven't done in my Monday night class because we were still holding kind of before the end, the teaching straightens out all by itself the kinds of doubts and questions that a person might have about the practice. I have a student in my Monday night class who doesn't come from a Hasidic background. She's really putting a lot of energy into learning, but she has a certain wariness about concepts that sound a little too far out. So this is something that she's been wanting to clarify for a long time. In fact, it was due to her, she made the choice that this was the lesson that we focused on next in that class, meaning that's, we move from subject to subject depending on what's of interest. So, and I've been having to reassure her over and over through the lesson as we've been learning it for the last 5 classes or whatever it is, that by the time we get to the end, she's going to feel a lot more comfortable with the concept, not because I've convinced her of anything, but because she's going to see that it makes a good deal of sense. It's just that she's been misunderstanding it until now. Now, lesson 2, first of all, started off with a dream. Reb Shmuel Isaac, who was one of Rabbi Nachman's original cohort of students, of close students. So Reb Shmuel Isaac, he was one of Rabbi Nachman's, actually one of his earlier students that he acquired. Shmuel Isaac lived in Dashev, and that's a little town that's not so far from Breslov. But at that point, Rabbi Nachman wasn't living in Breslov. Rabbi Nachman hadn't moved to Breslov yet. He was still living in a place called Zlata Polya. Zlatipolia, this was in the early years of Rabbi Nachman's career as a Rebbe. I mean, he also didn't have many years. His whole career as a Rebbe lasted maybe 12 or 13 years, Mashu Kazeh. I mean, he acquired his first Hasidim when he was really young, but in terms of really starting to have some kind of prominence, he didn't have more than maximum 15 years. So we, and imagine just how young he was when Reb Nosson first came his way. You know, he was in his 20s. They were both in their 20s. So it's just like interesting to imagine him that young. And it always kind of blows me away because I'm now about 10 years older than he was when he passed away, which always makes me feel really kind of embarrassed with myself, how much he accomplished and what he managed to do in his life, like, 10 years younger than I am. So it's sort of like, it's a little overwhelming to think about his gadlus and what levels he reached when he was still very, very young. In any case, he was still living in Zlatipolia, and there had already started to be some conflict with the leading Hasidic Rebbe who lived in the region, who originally had invited Rabbi Nachman to come and live in the town. His name was the Shpolya Zeta. He was the last surviving student of the Baal Shem Tov. And so Rabbi Nachman was a little bit in hot water. He was attracting students, and he was a little too popular, and there was some conflict between himself and the Shpolya Zeta, who was far, far his senior, and so things were a little rocky over on that end. Now, Shmuel Isaac lived in Dashiv, as I said, not far from Breslov. Quite a nice journey, though, from Zlatipolia to a different region altogether. And one night, Shmuel Isaac had a dream. He dreamed that it was a wintry, dark night, and with snow, and it was freezing, and so he was trying to get through these thick, like the thick clouds and the weather and the wind, and he was in a forest, a deep forest, and he ran into a man who was carrying a very large sword, and he said, "If you go over there, follow the road, you're going to find someone who's also going to be able to give you a sword. There's a man there with swords." They go together, I think. In the original dream, went together. There's two different versions about whether he went alone or whether he went with the other man. And they go to this other house. This is all in the dream of Reb Shmuel Isaac. And they go to this other house, and there's an old man there, and he's in a room surrounded by knives and swords of all different shapes and sizes, and all of them sharp. And he says to Reb Shmuel Isaac, he says, "You need to have a sword, but you need to go to that other town in order to get one from someone who's a master craftsman and who teaches people how to use them properly. So you can't take one from here, you're going to get one from there. But who knows if he'll even let you in if you try and get there." And that was the end of the dream. He woke up and he felt like he had this desperate need to go to Rabbi Nachman in Zlatipolia, and he didn't have any money, so he sort of like begged and borrowed. And a lot of the journey he did it was the middle of the winter. He did it on foot, in the very cold Ukrainian winter, and he made his way to Zlatipolia. When he got there, he started asking around where Rabbi Nachman lived. And they said, "Where's he staying?" And someone there said, "Don't you know that there's machlokas on him? Don't you know that there's that people are making trouble? You shouldn't be asking about him." So he couldn't find anyone to direct him to the house. He wandered and wandered in the cold until finally he found his way. Somebody pointed him in the right direction. When he got to the door, he knocked on the door, and he heard Rabbi Nachman behind the door saying, "You can't come in. I can't let you in right now." And Reb Shmuel Isaac, after coming all that way, he felt so broken, he started to cry, because he remembered in the dream that the old man had said to him, who knows if he'll even be able to get in. Which as soon as he had the obstacles trying to find the house in the town, he thought, "Oh, that's part of my dream." But now here he actually was knocking on the door, and Rabbi Nachman was behind the door, and he wouldn't let him in. So he didn't know what to do with himself. He had already, at great personal cost and effort, had tried to make his way there, and he couldn't find his way there. He couldn't get in. And then he cried there for some time, and he heard Rabbi Nachman behind the door. And then he heard Rabbi Nachman say, well, even if all the gates are closed, the gates of tears are not closed. Here, come in. So he opened the door. And he opened the door for him, and he started to tell him over a lot of the details of his own dream. Rabbi Nachman started to tell Reb Shmuel Isaac many of the details about his own dream. And at that point, Reb Shmuel Isaac stayed. He stayed for Shabbos, and that Shabbos, Rabbi Nachman taught this lesson. And in this lesson, he addresses a lot of the different themes that were in Reb Shmuel Isaac's dream. What is the meaning of the swords, the big swords and the little swords? What does it mean to find someone who can help you polish the sword? Why did he have so much trouble getting through these? Why did he think that he was in the dream? Why was he going through these kinds of obscuring mists and clouds, etc.? All of the imagery in the dream wound up being addressed. So, and it's addressed in this lesson. So that's the background to the story. Now, that's the background to the lesson. Now, in terms of the lesson itself, Rabbi Nachman opens up with the idea that the main weapon of Mashiach is prayer. And when he says weapon, he means the main tool, right? A weapon is a klei zayin, but it's a kli, it's a tool. So it's a tool through which it's possible. Rabbi Nachman says that we can, that's what helps us, the tool that allows us to accomplish everything that we need to accomplish and to overcome all of the challenges that we have to overcome. The main weapon is prayer. Now, it doesn't mean it's the only weapon, but in the very opening of his statement, he says, Iker klei zayin shel Mashiach. And in this lesson itself, he starts off with a kind of obscure quote from the Zohar, which is about the nature of Mashiach and the relationship of Mashiach to purity in prayer, and how the vitality and life force that vitalizes Mashiach really comes from prayer. Now, one of the things that's very interesting is that, one second, if we go back to that Kitzur Likutey Moharan, Reb Noson's digest version, so one of the things, Reb Noson occasionally will make changes to the text based on Rabbi Nachman's indications or what he learned from him outside of the lesson or in other places in the lesson. So Reb Noson, right at the beginning, he changes the term Iker klei zayin shel Mashiach, the main weapon of Mashiach, he changes that to Iker klei zayin shel Ish HaYisraeli, that the main weapon of every Jew is prayer. And that's very significant, because when you open the lesson, you think it's talking about Mashiach, and when you open up the Kitzur Likutey Moharan, Reb Noson tells us no. When Rabbi Nachman is talking about Mashiach, he's talking about the potential for redemption, and for saving oneself and redeeming oneself, rescuing oneself, so to speak, from the state of spiritual exile. That's something that everybody has a capacity for. That's called your spark of Mashiach that's inside of you. And just like Mashiach, for everybody, right, the big Mashiach gets his vitality from prayer, so too does the spark of Mashiach that's inside of you receive its vitality via prayer, so that you're able to accomplish everything you need to accomplish and overcome everything that you need to overcome. So right away we see that Reb Noson tells us Rabbi Nachman's intent was to tell us this is not only true of Mashiach, it's true of every single one of us. And so we have to understand a little bit more about the necessary conditions for tefillah, so that prayer should be as empowered as possible. Now, the next thing he deals with in the lesson, I'm not going through, until we get a little bit further down, I'm not going to go through the actual language of the lesson because it's too long. So I'm just going to give you a summary. And then when we get to the end, we'll hopefully have enough time to look inside. Now, when he speaks about the sword of prayer, so remember, it's this idea of a weapon. He says it's a double-edged sword. Now, the nature of a double-edged sword is that it's much more redeeming and rescue from our spiritual exile. We have many things to overcome in life. We have many challenges to overcome, and we also have obstacles to overcome, and we also have, it's like we have battles that we have to fight. That's what we're doing all day, every day, pretty much. So where are you supposed to get your koach from, right? Where does the power come from? The power comes from tefillah. That's why it's your weapon. Now, the weapon, Rabbi Nachman goes to great lengths to develop the mashal, right? If he's talking in the realm of the parable, So if we talk about the double-edged sword, first of all, it's double-edged because the main qualities of prayer are bakasha and shevach and bakasha. Praising God, thanking, also expressing gratitude also has to do with shevach, with praise, and making requests. So it's like you have this double edge, and obviously the sword is only as useful or beneficial as it's contingent on the skill of the person who's wielding it, right? Meaning it doesn't only have to be well balanced for you, it has to be sharp, it has to have its both edges in good repair, but more than that, you have to be able to use it properly. So he spends a good amount of the lesson developing the idea of having the quality of mishpat, right? Now the quality of mishpat, he says, is contingent on, mishpat means judgment, but we'll call it balance. So again, he's always coming back to this idea of not swaying to the right or to the left and having clear judgment, which also helps us to understand what it is that we're supposed to be praying for. Because when you open a siddur, that's one thing, but in hitbodedut, let's say, it's not always clear. Not everybody, and not everybody, but even any one of us at any particular time could have a lot of confusion about what it is that we're supposed to be praying about to begin with, or what the nature of the prayer should be, or what the language of the prayer should be. So that lack of clarity means that the sword is not sharp, or the sword is not balanced. And so we have a lot that we need to learn from people who are greater than we are, just to get down what is the proper use of this sword, how is it to be properly balanced. Now, aside from mishpat, meaning aside from just having clarity, which is necessary for being able to wield the sword of prayer properly and effectively, there's something more. I mean, one of the things that he says is, well, where's a sword? A sword is girded on your hips, right? So he spends quite a bit of time in the lesson talking about the fact that when a person lacks sexual purity, and he brings many proof texts to talk about this, and talks about it in lots of different ways, but when we're all confused in the area of the hips, in the area of the loins, so what it does is it imbalances our use of the sword. Now, it sounds very theoretical and abstract, but actually he says it's not at all, because a person can't focus properly on their prayers when they have problems in this area, and it's human to have problems in this area. So most people, to some degree or another, because they don't have a kind of absolute clarity and purity of mind and heart, their ability to wield the sword of prayer is impacted negatively. So how are you supposed to cure the problem? Meaning you need to be able to pray properly. You need to have real clarity of judgment and also purity of purpose of mind and heart, which are all functions of being on a pretty developed, evolved level on the spiritual plane. So how are you supposed to have all of that if you're just a regular person like you and me? It's not so easy. So one of the things that you do is you have contact and you learn from people who are greater than you. So let's think about the siddur itself. We spoke about this, I think, in the first lesson. The siddur that we have is, at its most basic, in its most basic sense, is the way that we bind our prayer to tzaddikim, because we didn't write those prayers. Or if you say Tehillim, right, you're using David HaMelech's words, and you're doing the work of tefillah via the language of those who had much greater purity of mind and purity of purpose and much greater balance and mishpat than we have. And so when you're able to use these prayer works that have been left by the tzaddikim, I was just the other day, I was preparing a lesson, and I was going through parts of the Shlach HaKadosh. Now the Shlach HaKadosh wrote many tefillot, and I happened to come across, while I was preparing something else, his tefillot. Now, the way he expresses the language of his prayers, where he just drops them into his books, because he writes these prayers, like prayers for children and prayers for, XYZ, parnassah. So he prayers, sorry, it blanked out. He authored prayers, and he puts them in, and it's so interesting the way he expresses it. He says, you could pray about this in this way, perhaps. Or you could pray about that matter in this way, perhaps. And you take hold of these prayers. They're such powerful, beautiful, awesome prayers. And you say, my goodness, how did he come up with the words? How did he know what to say? And the answer is, because he's the Shlach HaKadosh. because he was a great tzaddik who spent his whole life focused on Avodat Hashem, on serving God, and he wasn't focused on shtriot and nonsense, and his head and his heart were pure, and so he was able to compose prayers and share them with us. And this is even not that long ago. We're not talking about 2,000 years ago plus of our Shmona Esrei. We're talking about prayers that were composed in the last few hundred years, or even like Reb Noson's tefillot, much more recently. And nevertheless, they have such purity to them, and they stir us, and they speak to us and speak for us. Where do they get their koach from? And the answer is, because these were prayer masters, and they were clean and pure in their minds and in their hearts, and they were able to express tefillah in a way of emes and mishpat, in a way of truth and balanced judgment. And so their prayers are strong. I had a student came to me today. She said something's, I had an experience that was really disappointing. I was like, oh, what's his name? It's usually like, that's often the case. Something happened recently that really disappointed me. Like, okay, so I'm sorry that the shidduch didn't work out. Like, I don't even need to be told, you can tell. So she said something very interesting. She said, it really bothered me because he was like, he had all of his, my whole checklist, like even my secret checklist. He had all of those elements, like check, 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 check. He had all those qualities that I was looking for. And he was such a jerk. He was such not a nice guy. He was like really rude and inconsiderate, very judgmental. And I was like, well, my goodness, what's on your checklist? I said, where'd you get your checklist from? If those things he managed to get a pass on, right? In your checklist, he got a pass, but on the actual date, he turned out to be really not a nice person. So how on earth did it turn out that he got such a good grade on your checklist? The answer is, where'd you get your checklist from? So I always tell my students, don't make up your checklist. Listen, do yourself a favor. Say the prayer of the Shlach HaKadosh every day for a zivug. It's a beautiful tefillah. And it'll teach you something. One of the things it will teach you is about the qualities that are important in a spouse. Because anything that the Shlach HaKadosh did not think was important, he didn't include in the prayer. And anything he did think was important, he included in the prayer. He didn't list a whole bunch of qualities. So you really can't go wrong, because if the Shlach HaKadosh thought that it was an important quality, like it's an important quality, and if he felt that it was irrelevant and he left it out, then why on earth is it on your checklist? So I've told this over to my students any number of times, but it's sort of like, I get reacquainted with it. I open up the Shlach HaKadosh, and there I see again. He's a master of tefillah. How? Why? Because he has purity of mind and heart and action. And he's not filled with junk like the rest of us. And in addition, he has such a koach of mishpat, of good judgment in terms of what he's asking for. And so you say, well, I just want a piece of that. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. When the Jewish people are filled, we have a beautiful history of prayer masters throughout our entire history who knew exactly how to phrase tefillot. And so our avoda, like from our perspective, the real work for us is sort of like, I just want to really, first and foremost, make the best possible use of the prayer opportunities that have been given to me so freely from masters of tefillah over the last 3,500 years. I want to make good use of this first and foremost. Forget about my own hitbodedut. That I'll leave to the side for now, but just my tefillot. So when people say, I don't understand this whole idea of binding myself to the tzaddikim in order to pray, first and foremost, I have to realize your tehillim, your siddur, your extra tefillot that have been authored by other tzaddikim throughout the generations, you're making use of them is itself a kind of binding of yourself to the tzaddikim, otherwise you wouldn't have those tefillot. And that includes our entire Sefer Tehillim, all of our Likutey Tefillot, all of our siddur, etc. So that's number one. Meaning we're doing it anyway. Meaning even people who think they don't know anything about Chassidut, and this idea is something that's very foreign to them. Okay. Even for those who feel like this is an idea that is so foreign to them, the truth is it's not really that foreign to you, because you're doing it every day in any case. Now, the idea of articulating it, so that comes up, meaning, Hareini Mekasheres is that's me b'tfilasi l'cholat tzadikim. Like in Breslov, we have this kind of nusach that we say of binding oneself to the tzaddikim through the act of tefillah, or in this act of tefillah, or the mitzvah act, whatever it might be. So the fact that I'm doing it consciously, meaning the articulation of it, hasn't changed anything, because if I'm praying with a siddur, I'm already binding myself to the tzaddikim who gave me this siddur. So what's the advantage of me articulating it? And it means, first and foremost, it's a kind of humility, like, I couldn't come up with these tefillot, and I'm very, very grateful that I have them accessible to me. So I want to be bound up with that, and I want to be conscious about it, and I want to express the fact that I'm aware of it. That's number one. Now, there are other things also. There's also the fact that it's from the tzaddikim that I learned how to pray, And that was in Shmuel Isaac's dream, right? In Reb Shmuel Isaac's dream, it said, the old man said, go to the town, and there's somebody there who's a craftsman who can teach you how to he'll give you a sword, he'll teach you how to, he has big ones, he has small ones, he'll teach you how to sharpen it, he'll teach you how to use it. So the ways in which tzaddikim inspire us and teach us about the fundamentals of prayer, and more than the fundamentals, but and the finer points of prayer. So this is something that we're constantly in a relationship with them, whether they're alive in this world or whether they've passed on long ago. The tzaddikim, the work that they left behind, or the ones who are still with us, are also impacting, hopefully for the better, our tefillot. So it means to say, they give us swords, they give us the sword to hold, and also help us to learn how to wield it properly, even in the use of our own words of tefillah, meaning even in the realm of hitbodedut. I learned so much about tefillah from the tefillot that I have from the tzaddikim, from the lessons that I learned from their writings, etc. Or even if I've had the privilege to pray together with them. Now, let's move on in terms of the lesson. Now, in one of the points that Rabbi Nachman then deals with, I'm just going to move further down, is here in Vav. Now, this is a very important idea. It says, "V'tzarich kol echad lechavein b'tfilato." Now, this is where he says it's really very well articulated. And it's necessary that everyone should be mechavein b'tfilato, that one should intend with one's prayers, she'ikasher atzma letzadikim shebadur, to bind oneself to the tzaddikim of the generation. Ki kol tzaddik shebadur hu b'chinat Moshe Mashiach. Every tzaddik of the generation has some quality of Moshe Mashiach. Now, why does he put together Moshe and Mashiach? Because really, we only ever had one Redeemer, and Mashiach, even though he comes from the house of David, what he manifests is the quality of Moshe as a Goel, meaning the redemptive quality is really associated with Moshe, the spark of Moshe, which is manifests itself down the line in the descendants of David. He called tzaddik shebadur b'chinat Moshe Mashiach. He's going to explain a little bit more. K'moshe matzinu shetzadikim korim ze leze Moshe. We find in the Talmud that the tzaddikim sometimes call each other Moshe. K'ma Moshe shapir komart, as it says in the Talmud. One sage says to the other, calls him Moshe, even though his name was not Moshe. Moshe, you said well, or Moshe, are you saying well? So that's means to say when someone is mechadesh something, right? A sage is mechadesh something. He might be referred to by his peer, by his fellow sage, as Moshe, even though his personal name was not Moshe. Moshe is a b'chinat Mashiach. Now Moshe, the quality of Moshe, is redemption itself. K'moshe katuv, ad ki avo Shiloh. Now, in the promise that's in Yaakov Avinu's, in Yaakov's blessing to the tribes, his blessings to the tribes. So he blesses Yehuda. He says, Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda, u'mechokek mi bein raglav, ad ki avo Shiloh. So rulership, kingship and rulership don't pass from the line of Yehuda, whether from the father's side or the mother's side, ad ki avo Shiloh, until Shiloh comes. Now Shiloh is a place name, but Shiloh is also a reference. It's a nickname for Mashiach. But Shiloh is Gematria Moshe, right? Shin, we have the Shin. We have the Yud and the Lamed, which together is the equivalent, it's 40, which is the equivalent of Mem. And we have a Hey. Shin, Yud, Lamed, Hey is 300, that's the Shin. 10, 30, 340, 5 is the same Gematria as the name Moshe, Shin Mem He. So it says in the Zohar Kadosh, Moshe Mashiach. What's referred to in this pasuk, in this blessing to the tribe of Yehuda, that they'll always have leadership until Mashiach comes? We're talking about the quality of Moshe Mashiach. Kol tefillah utefillah, shekol echad mitpalel. Now, every single prayer that we say, doesn't matter how big, how small, how simple, how complex, hu b'chinat eivar mehashchina. This is called a limb of the Shechina. Shem Evarei Mishkan. Now, Rabbi Nachman is talking about a lot of ideas here, so I'm going to try and break it down so you don't get lost. You have your own personal prayers. I did speak about this at the very beginning, but I want to come full circle with it. All along we've been talking about the prayers that you offer and that are coming from you and that are about your needs, etc. But at the very beginning, remember I said that there's two different aspects of prayer. There's the personal part of your prayers, and then there's something that has to do with the collectivity of the Jewish souls of the Jewish people, which transcends your particular time and place, but is something that has to do with what we call avodah klalit. That means to say prayer as kind of a building up of a total structure of geula, of redemption, of completion, of spirituality and holiness, which is built up brick by brick. But when I say Rifa'enu, when I pray Barech Aleinu, generally speaking, I'm a simple person, so what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about myself, that my father needs a refuah shlema, and that we need parnasa. And if I'm a really, really developed person, I could be thinking about other people, not just my own inner circle, but maybe even about the Jewish people as a whole at this point in time. However, it's really only tzaddikim who are thinking about the totality of existence and the revelation of the divine presence in the world beyond the personal needs and even beyond not only their own personal needs, but the specific needs of their particular time and place. Meaning that kind of consciousness is something that we would say is usually the realm of tzaddikim. Now, somebody has to do this work. Meaning, here I am. I'm a simple person praying essentially for simple things, based on my own feeling of immediacy and urgency, based on my own situation. And that's valuable because it expresses the fact that I have trust and faith in Hashem, and that I know that He's listening, and that I know that prayer matters, etc. And so a lot spiritually is accomplished. It is something that's real and important whenever I say any tefillah, right? Like He says, V'chol tefillah u'tefillah shel kol echad mitpalel. Meaning even the youngest child and even the most ignorant Jew and even the most learned Jew, like all of us, with all of our many, many personal prayers, are all very important as individual pieces of something that's much greater than our own personal needs. Now, who actually, though, does the work of taking all of these individual pieces and building something that's significant or that's lasting or that is even redemptive out of it? That's not the job of you or me. Meaning we, as regular people, we offer the material. We'll call it Rabbi Nachman called bring the bricks. We bring the raw material, but actually it's the tzaddikim who do the bigger work of taking all these individual tefillot and make something bigger out of it, something that's of more significance for the collectivity of the Jewish people and for the entirety of the world. Our tefillot are only by ourselves, are only as powerful or empowered as our own kavanot and our own intentions and our own purity of thought can take us. And some of us are better at that, and some of us are worse. But in terms of doing the big work for the collectivity, that's not something that any of us actually wind up doing because we're really just not suited for it. This kind of work is very delicate and very difficult, and you have to be also on a certain spiritual level to be able to do it. And so we call this avodas hatzadikim. This is the kind of stuff that tzaddikim have to do. But can they do it if you don't do your tefillah? Meaning, is it something that Mashiach can do? Mashiach, on his own. Why doesn't he just come and bring the geula already? Can't he? Not a righteous individual? Doesn't have enough potential, doesn't have enough koach? And the answer is, it doesn't matter, because he can only work with the material that is provided to him by the Jewish people as a whole. This is true in terms of tefillah, it's true in terms of mitzvah, and so it is for all of the tzaddikim in every generation. They can only work with what they're given to work with. If it was up to tzaddikim by themselves, we would say they should have brought Mashiach a long time ago. And the answer is, well, they can't, because we're in a symbiosis with them, where we have our part of the avodah that needs to be done, and they have their part of the avodah that needs to be done. Is everybody with me? Yeah? I'm just trying to make sure. Are you following? Because these are ideas that if you haven't been introduced to them before, it's sort of like, really? Yes. He's going to bring an example. Once he brings the example, you're like, oh, it starts to make sense. So if each tefillah, right, each prayer is called a limb of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the manifest presence of God. So it means to say it's a little bit of revelation. Like when you're standing in the corner and you're pouring your heart out before Hashem, it's your little bit of revealing the presence of God in the world, because otherwise what are you praying about? You only pray because you know that God is listening. It means every tefillah does something on the micro level of revealing the divine presence in the world. However, it's not enough for me to be in my corner and doing my little piece here. I'm actually supposed to be part of something much bigger than myself in order to carry out a much bigger revelation, a fuller revelation of the divine presence. So he calls this the Evarei HaMishkan. This is not his statements. This is actually coming from earlier sources, but he puts it together. So they're called the limbs or the parts of the Mishkan. She'ein shum echad miYisrael yachol la'ayla shayfa b'shayfa kol chad l'duchta ele Moshe b'lechud. This is Aramaic, not Hebrew, and it's being brought over from the Zohar Kadosh. There's not a single Jew among the Jewish people who, at the time of Moshe, they were all great tzaddikim, they were all very righteous people on a very lofty spiritual level. That generation was called the Dor De'ah, the generation of knowledge of Hashem. They had come to an incredible level of divine awareness. They had received the Torah, they ate the man, they had seen the miracles that took place at the Exodus. They were of the loftiest possible potential. And nevertheless, when it came time to build the Mishkan, anybody could bring whatever offering they wanted to bring, whatever their heart disposed them to bring, as an offering to build the Mishkan. However, if they didn't bring it to Moshe, it didn't get incorporated into the Mishkan. Every single offering, whether it was gold or whether it was a piece of wood, it all had to be brought to Moshe, and only he was able, as it says in the Zohar Kadosh, to actually take all of these component parts and put it together and build it into a single comprehensive whole. And by the way, isn't it so nice that it's coming out right like Hanukkah time? It's the first light of Hanukkah for us. We already lit for those who are not in Israel, so you have a little time left until you're going to be lighting. Nevertheless, the idea of the Chanukah Sabayis, right, of the Mishkan, right, the Nesi'im, the korbanot of the Nesi'im are brought, of the princes were brought, and they're recited during Hanukkah. So we have this. A contact for tech support. You have to get in touch with Yossi Katz. Are you able to hear and see? If you're not able to hear and see and you're having an issue, usually you should disconnect and try connecting again. That usually resolves it. Okay, so Kol Tefillah L'Tzadik Ador. So nobody was able. You could be Aaron Cohen. You could be Miriam Hanaviah. You could be like the greatest of that generation. It doesn't matter. Your personal contribution is not going to be incorporated into the Mishkan unless you bring it to Moshe. Now, Rabbi Nachman is trying to tell us that when we're talking about building something bigger than just our own little artifact in Tefillah, so we may be able to have our little artifact, and it may express our goodwill and our desire to give something and to offer something to Hashem. But it is not going to be a piece in the bigger construction unless we are bound up, and we're supposed to be consciously bound up, not just by proxy, but consciously bound up with the tzaddik or a tzaddik of the generation who's capable of doing this work. And again, does it mean you actually bring something physical? Are you supposed to be thinking of a tzaddik while you're praying? No. It's kind of like a preliminary consciousness that you have before the beginning of prayer. Meaning it's customary in Breslov to say a statement of hitkashrut, of binding oneself, it's customary in Breslov to say it. It's not something that you think about necessarily. You shouldn't be thinking about it while you're praying. You're only supposed to be thinking about God. However, ahead of time, I want to prepare myself for the idea that I'm not doing this alone. My action, my prayer action, is um, is is fostered, and it's bound up with those who really are able to do the work of prayer. I'm doing whatever it is that I can do. It doesn't absolve me, by the way. This work of binding does not absolve me a kihuzen, not even the least little bit, from doing the part that I have to do. Quite the contrary. The tzaddik can't do my contribution for me, but I can't do the work that the tzaddik does. And so it's a kind of symbiosis. V'yaviva to Mishkan el Moshe, as it says, and they brought all of the bits and pieces and parts of the Mishkan to Moshe, as it says in the Pasuk. V'hu yodeh la'el shayfa b'shayfa, and he knows how to put the whole thing together, one part, one section together with the other, la'asot ota koma shlema, and to make it into a full structure. And when he talks about koma shlema, he's talking more than the actual structure of the Mishkan, because he told us we're really talking about the Mishkan, we're talking about the Shechina, we're talking about the upright, built-up revelation of the divine presence. That's something which is transpersonal and transgenerational, and it's more than one tzaddik who's doing it. It's all of the tzaddikim throughout all of our long history have been involved in this very deep internal work that requires the involvement and the participation of the rest of the Jewish people, and also a kind of humility on the part of the rest of the Jewish people, an understanding that I have a limitation as to what I'm capable of, but me being aware of that is no obstacle. Quite the contrary. A person who thinks that they can do it themselves, right? They're the ones who are in trouble. Now, I'll tell you a side point. We have in Avaneha Barzel, which is one of the kind of biographical additional material books in the story of Breslov. So a student once came, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Nachman Tulchin, I don't remember, came to Reb Nosson and asked him, what's better, to be a great person who's not connected to the tzaddik, or to be a simple person who can't do that much, who is connected to the tzaddik? And Reb Nosson said as follows: it's better to be a simple person connected to the tzaddik than to be even a great, very great person disconnected from the tzaddik. And what was his proof? He used exactly the example from this lesson. He said, in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, you could have built, let's say, the Aron HaKodesh, all by yourself. Gold and wood and kruvim and who knows what. Let's imagine you're a great enough person to be able to build an Aron HaKodesh all by yourself. What would happen if you built it in your tent, but you never brought it to Moshe? Nothing. It means it would be a beautiful artifact. It would be a beautiful piece of work, but it would not be part of the Mishkan. It only becomes part of the Mishkan by virtue of the fact that there's a relationship between you, the person who made the piece, and the tzaddik who incorporated it into the bigger structure. So Reb Nosson says, better to be a simple person connected to the tzaddik than to be even a great person disconnected from the tzaddik. Now, that's a very deep idea, because it means that, and it's also sort of deceptive, because here I'm sitting in my tent with this beautiful, beautiful Aron HaKodesh, right? And my neighbor, who's a very simple person, like, what'd he bring? He brought some dyed fabric, a textile, which hasn't even, what is it already? And he brought this dyed wool, not even woven, brought this dyed wool over to Moshe, and that's going to be part of the curtains of the Mishkan? And the answer is yes. My simple neighbor who in his simplicity knew that if he wants it to be incorporated into the bigger picture, it's not just a private experience, him and his tent with his wool, but it's something that is part of a much bigger structure. For that, he has to have a relationship with the person who is putting the structure together. And so it's something that's deeply internal. It's not about thinking about a particular tzaddik even. It's not about necessarily even having met a tzaddik in person and having a kind of a speaking or visual, face-to-face relationship with a tzaddik. It's an awareness that I am not a person who is on the dargah, who's on the level of doing this kind of cosmic work all by myself. It's just outside of my pay grade for many reasons. Because I don't have the mishpat, because I don't have the purity of thought, of heart and mind, which is actually the baseline definition of what it means to be a tzaddik. So lacking that degree of development. Okay, so I know my place. I have what to contribute. I have, like Rabbi Nachman says, bring the bricks, bring the mortar, bring the materials, and let me do my part with it. You do your part, I do my part. Now let's move on a little bit. Okay, now because we have a few minutes left, and because it's such a powerful ending to the lesson, I just want to share with you. This lesson is what we call one of the Rabbi Bar Chana lessons. Rabbi Nachman, after giving over this whole, a whole built-up structure, what he does afterwards is, in a certain number of lessons, he takes a Talmudic teaching, which is actually, it's one of these. The Rabbi Bar Chana stories are paradigms of like really deep Talmudic narrative that's obviously very symbolic and doesn't really explain itself, and it sounds like a very fantastic story. So those stories, Rabbi Bar Chana, those are like the most prototypical of such types of Talmudic narrative material. And so what he does is afterwards, everything that he's done in the lesson until now, he weaves together so that we can understand one of these short little anecdotes. So I think I'm going to take the last few minutes and go through it with you just so you can see what he's done with it, and also because he kind of takes it a little bit further. So we're going to move forward. And by the way, be advised, we have just been like picking different ideas out of this lesson, and we're not going through it because this is a lesson that in my night classes on Monday nights, this is a lesson that we have been going through already for 6 weeks or whatever it is, and we're still not finished with it. So just be aware. Okay, we're here now. And this, meaning everything we've spoken about until now, can be woven in together and be seen now that we have new eyes. We'll be able to see it in this anecdote that is a Rabbi Bar Chana story. Rabbi Bar Chana was one of the Talmudic sages. Here. Chazinan lahai kavra. Okay, so over here is the original story. And I'm going to tell it to you. I'm going to say, that sounds a little fantastic. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana. It says in the Gemara in Bava Basra, in the tractate Bava Basra, on page 73b. Rabbi Bar Chana said, Simna chada havakazlina besfinta. Once upon a time, we were traveling on a ship. V'chazinan hahu kavra, and we saw that island. The yatvala chalta agabe, and it had chol, it had sand that was heaped up on top of it. V'kadcha agma iluha. V'kadcha agma iluha. 1 second. Let me just check what the Rashbam says. Kadcha is grass, and grass was growing on top of it. Savrinan yabeshtahu. We thought that it was dry land. V'salkinan v'afinan ubashlinan. So we got off the ship and we settled ourselves on the island. And afinan, we baked. Bashlinan, we cooked agabe on the surface of the island. V'chadcham agabe, when the fire that we had lit to cook and bake had gotten hot enough, what happened? Itapich, the whole island flipped over. V'ilav dahava makarva lesfinta havatavinan. And had we not been close to the ship, we would have drowned. Now, what does he mean to say? Is it actually an island? No, it's a fish. It's a giant fish. Hahu kavra is actually a giant fish, and in our ignorance, because it was so very big and because it was so very well entrenched and it had all of looked like it was a whole ecosystem growing on it. So we were sure that it was dry land, but actually we heated it up and it woke up into life, flipped over like fish do, flipped over, and had we not been close to the ship, meaning had we not been able to escape to the ship, which was anchored offside, we would have drowned. Okay, so that's a typical Rabbi Bar Chana story of like this kind of fantastic happening, like how big was this fish, how could it have all of this, growth on its back and the sand and all of that, and how could you have mistaken it for, it sounds sounds mythical, and all of the Rabbi Bar Chana stories sound mythical. Now let's see what Rabbi Nachman did with it. Zeh shama Rabbi Bar Chana, chazina lahai kavra, ki begaluteinu kavyachol hakadosh baruch hu bahastarat panim. In our exile, it's as if God is in a state of hastarat panim, as though he's hiding his face from us. Now he says kavyachol. He doesn't want to say that God actually hides his face. It's the way it appears from our perspective, right? That God's face is not revealed, meaning there's not a revelation of the Shekhinah. And so we call this state of affairs hastarat panim, the concealment of the divine presence. K'moshe katuv, histarta panecha shu b'chinat rachamim, upana oref shu b'chinat din. So the face is the quality of mercy. And when a person turns his back, like we even say in English, he turned his back on me. So hastarat panim, the hiding of the face, the concealment of the face, is that you're only seeing the back, which means the person has turned away from you. They're no longer showing you the face of kindness. And in our long exile, that's what it means to be in a state of hester panim, of concealment of the divine presence. We suffer under the quality of din, under harsh heavenly judgment. V'chol tefilotenu bakashtenu al zeh shepana oref eleinu, shiachzor et panav. And what are we doing basically throughout our long exile? It's 2,000 years already that we're begging Hashem to turn back to us, to turn His face back to us. K'mo shekatuv pnei elai, k'mo shekatuv ya'er Hashem panav. Right? That's all that we're really asking for. Because really, when it comes down to it, everything that we need and everything that we're asking for is just, please take us out of the concealment of your presence and let us see your face. Let us see the light of your face. Let us receive the blessing of seeing the light of your face. K'mo shekatuv ya'er Hashem panav. Ukshanu ro'im orech hagalut. However, as we see how long the exile has lasted, it's 2,000 years already. B'chol yom, anachnu tzoakim elav einam noshaim. And day after day goes by, we cry out to Him. We're crying and we're praying, and we're still not being answered. Because we've been praying so long, it's like there are people among the Jewish people. We have brothers and sisters who are just like, oh, it doesn't even work. Right? So why are we bothering? They lose faith in prayer itself because the exile has gone on so very long. Now, that's true for the collective, and it's also true for the individual, because a person who continues to pray for something endlessly and doesn't get answered, it's sort of like you're at risk of your heart being broken and getting heartsick and losing faith that you're ever going to be helped. He says, כל תפילות הצדיקים שבכל דור הם מעלים אותם, מקימים אותם. However, the tzaddikim of all, throughout all of the generations, have been involved in a very long, very gradual process of taking all of the tefillot and uplifting them, and standing them upright, and using them to build an upright structure. K'mo shekatuv, v'yakeh Moshe et hamishkan, that Moshe stood up the Mishkan. He built this Mishkan. Umalim kol shaifa v'shaifa ledurte. Every prayer takes its place in the bigger structure. Ubonin komata shel hashchina ma'at ma'at. And the upright structure of the Shekhinah is being built up little by little. Ad shishtalim shiur komata, until it will be completely until it will be completed in its fullness. Az yavo Mashiach, and that's what we call the Geula. It's when the upright structure in the internality of the world has been built up fully, then it will be revealed fully. Da Moshe, yashlimota v'kimota b'shlemut. Now, in terms of our mashal, meaning the Rabbi Bar Chana story, ze perush, chazina lahai kavra. We saw this fish, b'chinas tzadik hadur, nikra dag. Dagim, the fish, are often symbolizing tzaddikim, right? Fish is the only type of flesh food that doesn't require shchita, right? It means, and they always are in water, and they always have an eye open at least, and that's called in p'kicha derachamei. Fish, for many reasons, are symbolic and emblematic of tzaddikim. So it says we saw the big fish, right? Not the little fish, the big fish, this big fish. And that's called the tzaddik of the generation. Diyat v'leichalta agabe, and it had all of this sand that was heaped up on its back. What's that? The sand is the tefillot. Why are they called? Why is chalta? Why is prayer called sand? Now, there's a few different reasons. One of them is because the tefillot, prayers, come from the Jewish people who are like the sand of the shores, right? Hashem told Abraham that your children will be like the sand, also the stars. However, it's for even more straightforward link between them. Chal vayachel Moshe. To pray is to beseech, is the language of tochelet or chal or vayachel. That chet lamed root means to pray. So the word for sand in Hebrew and also in Aramaic, chalta or chol, is just in and of itself, in its root, related to the word for prayer, one of the words that we have for prayer. So it says, this fish has all this sand heaped up on its back. That means to say there's an accumulation that's building and building of all of these tefillot, all of these prayers throughout all of these generations. And yatvale, and it was building up and building up. So it has to be brought. Yatva also means it's not just that it's building up, but also that yatvale means to bring something. So meaning all of those tefillot have to be brought to the tzaddik. Kadche ale agma, and grass was even growing up on there. Hainu haneshamot habaim ima tefillah. That's a part of the lesson I did not get into. But the idea of the living grasses that receive their vitality from the matrix of the tefillah itself. Like when you're praying, you could start off depleted, but the more energy, that's one of the things about prayer that actually we did learn this in either the first or second class in this series, is that one of the paradoxical aspects of prayer is that the more energy you invest in it, the more you feel alive afterwards. You know, usually if you invest energy in something, so you feel, if you expend a lot of energy, it's spent. But when you pray, tefillah lekel chayai, David HaMelech said, no, if you'll invest the energy, you wind up with more energy afterwards, which we happen to know, right? When you have a really good davening, you might have started off really tired, but you have a beautiful davening, you come out of that tefillah and you feel refreshed, you feel rejuvenated. Even if it took a lot of energy out of you, you still feel like you got something. You didn't give in something, you actually got something out. So that's like the blades of grass, each individual Jewish soul that's nourished and that's revived and rejuvenated from the tefillah and the accumulation of the tefillah. Here, Bechinat Betulot, Agma V'chulei. Here. So what does it mean? We thought it was tefillah. And when in the Mashal, in Rabbi Baruch Hana says, we thought it was dry land, Yabeshta. Yabeshta means dry land. It's from the word Yavesh. So he says, we saw like this whole accumulation on the back of the fish of all of these tefillot and all of these people that are all of these Jews who are bound up with their tefillot and for generation after generation, but it looked to us like it's a Yabeshta. It looked to us like it's dry land. That means to say it's not producing any fruits. What happened? Afinan, bashlinan. What'd we do? We got off the ship and we started to cook and we started to bake. And that means to say that the tefillot started to rise. They started to move up. That's the idea of the heat, that things start to rise and get warm. And it starts getting itself warmed up and ready for the fullness of coming into itself. And the Shekhinah is ready to be revealed. Then what happens? Itapech, it all flipped over. And the attribute of judgment gets flipped over into the attribute of mercy in order to bring Mashiach. Okay. Zehu. So, he says, Tefillah lekel chayai. Tefillah lekel chayai in Tehillim. So, with Hashem's help, and very important, and that's what we're going to end off with this last little message. The reason why I wanted to share this with you is always to be aware. Your little tefillah is part of something that's much bigger than just you. Never to give up on the tefillah, not to be mityaeshet, not to ever despair from tefillah. This is the weapon and this is the tool of the Jewish people that we have from our forefathers and our foremothers. Our whole essence is bound up with tefillah as Jews. This is part of our nature. It's part of our inheritance. If you ever feel like, oh, I can't believe I have to daven about this thing, it's still not been answered. Remember this lesson with the image of the fish, that giant fish. That's the hole is building up and building up on its back, but when it's cooking, it starts to cook, and when the time is ripe, so then boom, everything flips over. Hashem should help that all of our prayers should be answered for the good. Have a beautiful Chanukah, a lichtige Chanukah, a freilichen Chanukah, everything good. Enjoy the candles, enjoy the Chag. Just have good, like don't forget after the candle lighting, take a little time. Don't run to go do things. Just sit by your candles, sing, read something inspiring. Just look at them and gaze upon them. Enjoy everything good.